Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from Rao's IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC Civil Services Examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 9th of May 2021. The articles which we are going to cover today have been displayed on your screen. And let us now begin the discussion with an important announcement. Now all of us understand the importance of optional subject in overall scheme of UPSC Civil Services Examination. And if you're confused about which optional subject to choose, how to find the best teachers and academic support for your optional papers, and above all, how to prepare for the same during these difficult times, Rao's IAS has best solution for your optional subject related problems. We are conducting optional orientation sessions on 22nd and 29th of May 2021, in which you can learn from the Rao's IAS teachers about how to prepare for the optional subjects and how are we going to help you in scoring your best in the mains examination. The optional batches are starting from 4th of June and 5th of July 2021 via live online classes. Consider this as a call to all of those who wish to completely cover the optional subject by December 2021. This will ensure timely coverage of optional subject, and then you can focus your attention completely on prelims from January or February 2022 and keep revising the optional subject till you appear for the mains examination. Rao's IAS is offering guidance for political science, public administration, history, sociology, geography, economics and psychology from Delhi, Jaipur and Bangalore centers. In the description of the video, there is a link which you can use to register yourself for the orientation for the respective optional subject session. We at Rao's IAS are committed to give you the best guidance and academic support to excel in civil services examination. Join the orientation and kickstart your mains optional subject preparation from a team of best teachers in the arena. Let us now begin the discussion. So the first news which we have taken for today's discussion appears on page number 6. EU-India relaunch FTA talks, sign connectivity partnership. Now this is a very important issue, especially with respect to GS Paper 2 international relations. As you can clearly see, bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India is exactly the line of the syllabus you are looking at when you are preparing this particular news. So India and European Union agreed yesterday to relaunch free trade negotiations by resuming talks that were suspended in 2013 for bilateral trade and investment agreement. Now this is a kind of free trade agreement. Let's be very clear about it. Put simply, it's about two groups of nations coming together to make it easier for the industries to interact and do business, making it easier to export and import, and hence increasing the amount of trade in between them. So this particular news basically deals with India and EU relations and India and European Union's bilateral investment treaty. But this is Daily News Simplified, and here we simplify the news for you. And that is the reason that we will start right at the basic. We will start by first understanding what actually are free trade agreements, why are they needed, what are the different kinds of terms when we read in the newspapers, PTA, FTA, RTA, CECA, CEPA, BTIA, what they specifically mean and how are they different with each other, why two countries enter into FTA, basically what are the advantages which are provided by signing an FTA, what are the specific advantages which are going to be arrived or reaped by both European Union and India, and still there are issues because of which we are not able to arrive at the consensus, and specifically what are the roadblocks between European Union and India because of which we are not able to finalize the agreement even 15 years after the negotiation. Alright, so starting the discussion with the very basics about which most of the aspirants are confused as to what are free trade agreements. And so let us start by first defining what free trade agreement is. So put simply, free trade agreement is an agreement between two or more nations, establishing fair set of rules for both trade and commerce. And we will see how this trade and commerce can deal with goods, services, or even with the investments. Now these agreements are not like normal agreements between two countries. These agreements should be legally binding commitments as far as the 2 or 3 or whatever be the number of the parties entering into the agreement is concerned, it should be legally binding on all of them. Only then it would enable proper and fair trade and commerce between 2 or more countries. Now, once these countries enter into such an agreement, they promise each other to gradually and slowly provide preferential treatment to the goods and services from each other. And so one of the examples would be to reduce or eliminate various kinds of trade barriers. For example, the import duty or import quota, or the number of items which can be imported in a country from another country. And so what happens when these two countries or 2 or more countries entered into a free trade agreement, they slowly and gradually keep on reducing these kinds of trade barriers. And generally there is a sequence which is followed in most cases. You start by first liberalizing the trade in goods, then you move on to the services, and finally into the investments. And so when you have a level of commitment and the trust between 2 or 3 or more countries, where you can talk about setting up of rules for investment, which means that you have already achieved the highest level of commitment. And so that is why generally the countries start by first liberalizing the trade of goods. So at the very, very basic level, even in the goods, the countries start by first either reducing or removing altogether import duties on a lot of products. And it is not important that these agreements should cover each and every goods exchange between the countries. They can start by liberalizing only one product, or they can start by 100 products, or even they can go to include all the products, but generally it is not extended to all the products. So they can start by first reducing the import duties on selected few items. So reduction of import duty is all about reduction of tariff barrier. But then you have a lot of non-tariff barriers which are hindering the trade between the two nations. And so then countries focus on reduction of non-tariff barriers. And then finally, when they have done significantly on these two fronts, they move on to ease customs procedure, which is all about reducing the amount of time it takes to transact a good from one nation to another. For example, the two countries design or modify their port clearances procedure in such a way that when a country A, having signed an agreement with country B, sends their goods to the country B, B understands that they have FTA and they don't need any kind of clearance, because we know what kind of procedure is being followed in A while export, and so at import there is no need for higher scrutiny, and so it will reduce the amount of time which will take for a product exported from A to reach into the domestic market of country B. So now you can clearly understand that how these three kinds of measures would go a long way in rapidly increasing the exchange of goods between two countries which sign an FTA. Once they have done this for goods, then they move on to the services, where they make sure that there is an enhanced level of access which is being provided. And one of the best examples would be the recognition of the degree of India into B, so that the Indian people having a normal BTech from Indian universities and colleges can go to US and serve as software engineers there without reappearing for examination. And so that is the kind of difference you can see, that a lot of countries do not recognize a lot of services being provided in India, and that is why when they go to US, they have to requalify their domestic examinations. Whereas in some of the cases it is not true. And so this is where the services sector or the enhancement of access to services sector comes into play. After the liberalization of the service regime, they finally move on to the investment regimes, where they design the rules so that they are able to protect investment from country A into country B and vice versa. These rules are designed so that no national government can make rules which adversely impact one another's investment into each other. Now moving on to the question which often baffles the aspirants, which is, what are the differences between all these 6 terms? What is this PTA, FTA, RTA, SEPA, CISA and BTIA? And so you can clearly see that I have written 3 names above and 3 names below, because they can be clearly demarcated from each other in 2 groups. The first group involves more traditional forms of agreements, which are preferential trade agreement, free trade agreement and regional trade agreements. All these 3 mostly are limited to the exchange of goods. They are the traditional form of agreements in which 2 or more nations have been associating each other. Whereas the 3 terms written below are more comprehensive in their approach, and hence the name comprehensive, because they are integrated packages not just covering goods but also services, intellectual property rights, protection, Also, investment protection. So when you have two countries negotiating with each other in so many domains of trade and commerce, that is called a CECA, CEPA or BTIA, and which is what India and European Union are doing right now. So there is no clear-cut official designation from the government of India as to how these will vary, but when a name includes CECA or BTIA, you must understand that these two countries are negotiating not just for goods but also for access to each other's services, IPR protection and investment protection. Whereas when two countries think of negotiating whatever has been written in the first row, they're just talking, or their agreement is just limited to the access and exchange of goods. Now the basic question: two countries can trade normally, they can trade under the WTO regime, they can trade with each other even without WTO regime. So what advantages do these FTAs or these BTIAs or CECAs provide over the existing regime that the countries try to enter into such an agreement? There has to be some very solid reason for the nations to do an agreement. Now, first and foremost advantage of two countries signing a free trade agreement is that the members of an agreement gain benefit over non-members, and we are going to understand this with a very simple illustration. Let's say that this is a country A which has the domestic market, and then you have another country B, and A and B sign a free trade agreement among them, under which the A and B both decide to do away on exchange of or the trade of cars. So any car which is made in B and exported to A will attract 0% duty, and similar will be the case when a car is manufactured in A and goes to B, 0% duty. And so these are the only two countries under the FTA. And let's say that there is another country C, excellent manufacturer of cars, the best in the world, but has not entered into any such free trade agreement either with A or with B. And so, even though it produces the best and most efficient cars, it is exposed to the 20% import duty when it exports its cars to either B or A. So what this free trade agreement between A and B has done, that it has protected the domestic manufacturing of both A and B from much more superior and efficient industry of C through a simple reduction of tariffs. So this was the example which was just limited to the goods. What about services? And similarly, let's say that if A and B decide that they are going to recognize the professionals involved in accountancy, for example, the chartered accountants, and people involved in legal professional, for example, lawyers, of each other into each other's territory. And so, for example, a person graduating in legal stream, a lawyer in B, can go to A and practice in A's court. And similar is the case with A and B. And if they do that, you can understand that the professionals of A and B have much more advantage in each other's territories as compared to a person who could be the best person in the world, who could be the most intelligent, knowledgeable and skillful person in the world in that field, but still would not be allowed to practice as a lawyer in either A and B. And so you can see clearly that signing a free trade agreement provides huge advantage and benefits to the members over the non-members. So that is point one. Then comes the ease of negotiations. Now what does this mean? Of course there has to be ease of negotiations, only then an agreement can come forward. But here we are talking with respect to the multinational or intergovernmental organizations, especially WTO. We know that there are two peculiar things or the traits with WTO which make it exceedingly difficult for the countries to arrive at a decision. First is the vast membership of WTO. And then the requirement that each and every country would have to be on board, that is, the decisions will be made on consensus. Even if one country or two countries do not agree out of 150, the decisions would not be made. And so that is the problem with the larger organizations. And so it provides a very advantageous situations for 3, 4, 5 countries in a region, that they can negotiate their own rules and regulations and they can arrive at a consensus much sooner as compared to a platform as wide and large as WTO. Then third biggest advantage of free trade agreement is that it provides the quickest way to increase the market size. The national governments of the countries design a lot of policies, financial policies, fiscal policies, monetary policies to increase the size of their market. But the free trade agreements are the easiest way to do that. For example, a country A in isolation would have an economy of this size. Country B in isolation would have an economy of this size. But let's assume that if they sign a free trade agreement dealing with the exchange of the goods, which means that most of the goods, even if not most, but some of the goods can be exchanged freely between these two nations, would mean that as far as those chosen and selected goods are concerned, now the market size is this much, which is massive boost to both these countries' economy. And so that is why it is the quickest way to increase the market size. Then the next biggest advantage of free trade agreements are that they lock in reforms. And they lock in reforms in such a way that reversal on a particular economic policy or a set of policies become very difficult for national governments. And to make this point clear, you'll have to understand that political parties have an agenda because of which they try to capture the power. And a part of agenda also includes economic policy. So most national parties have some or the other idea about how they are going to carry on with the economics of the country. But the problem is that in a democratic setup, these political parties in power keep on changing. And so when a particular party initiates a kind of reform, which is appreciated not just globally but also domestically, which is thought of as beneficial to overall economy, could well be reversed by the next government in power. But if a country signs a free trade agreement, it would become very difficult for the oncoming governments to remove or reverse it, simply because it is a legally binding agreement. When you sign an agreement between A and B, when two countries A and B sign an agreement, they promise each other for rest of the life or some 50 years, 30 years, 40 years that they are going to follow on what they have promised. If they have agreed that they are going to remove or reduce the import duty, they will do that, and they cannot be unilaterally taken away, not without any impunity. And so that is why it locks in reforms for a longer time. Then of course it leads to enhancement of trade between two countries, which is the starting point, which later on intensifies into increased diplomatic relations. And finally, signing more and more such agreements with the neighboring and other countries signals the openness or at least the intention of an economy to open up to the investors, which then opens the floodgate for foreign direct investment, because then only high net worth individuals, investors, they are confident enough that now this country is pursuing an agenda or is committing itself to follow rule-based trading. And now if we invest in this particular country, our investment will not only safe, but it is also likely to grow. And so these are the main advantages to both the countries or the group of countries. And we know that in case of BTIA, the two negotiating parties are European Union and India. And so let us understand what are the benefits which shall be reaped by both European Union and India, both in terms of politics as well as in terms of economy. Now this is just to give you an idea so that you are in a condition to better appreciate such kind of agreements. So now these are the benefits which shall be reaped by both the countries if and only if they are able to conclude an agreement. If they are able to conclude an agreement, this would mean that this will be the first free trade agreement of European Union with a major emerging economy. And it will strengthen European Union's role in global trade governance. Because if they can arrive at consensus as far as trading is concerned with India, they can do so with many other countries. So basically they will reflect or they will bolster their credentials as trade partner if they are able to convince India on minimum common trading rules. If we talk about India, it will provide much needed boost to its Make in India policy. We know that India did not join RCEP. And so India is also looking for some large free trade agreement. And so it will give India a big boost, especially after RCEP setback. And if the agreement with EU is successful, it will support India's rise as a regional power. When we talk about economy, you need to appreciate that European Union is not only India's largest trading partner, it is also the largest source of investment as well as the biggest source of technology. And so if we combine just these three factors, wouldn't it make sense for India and European Union to conclude a free trade agreement? Apart from that, India lacks free trade agreement with any of its top trading partners. For European Union, a successful agreement with India would mean an access to a market with more than 1.3 billion people with rising incomes, and it is going to minimize the impact of Brexit as much as possible. And so you can see that if India and European Union are able to conclude BTIA, it shall going to have both political as well economic connotations. But if everything is so simple as we have explained, why is that the two partner nations are negotiating such an agreement since so many years? And the answer to that is because there are vast areas of disagreements. All of us understand the convergences. We know that coming together is going to help both these nations. But even after such an understanding, if they are not able to conclude an agreement, which means that there has to be substantial grounds for disagreements. And now let us understand those grounds very, very clearly. But if I have to summarize in the beginning, these issues just not limit themselves to the goods trading, but they are also limited to the rules and regulations related to services, the India's foreign direct investment rules, the restrictive measures which India has adopted, and with respect to the data security rules of European Union. And so let us understand these issues one by one. Now, we have seen how the goods and the rules related to the goods trading form the basis of any free trade agreement going beyond into services and investments. And they are very significant divergence as far as the beliefs and the views of EU and India are concerned, mainly because India imposes massive tariffs on cars, on wines, and on dairy products, which will also engulf in itself European dairy. And you can see that how these 2 and 3 items are one of the biggest and most well-known goods which European countries exports. Whenever we see any high-end car, whether it is Audi, Mercedes, or even BMWs, all of them are taxed heavily in India when they cross Indian borders and enter into India. And this is one of the biggest points of disagreement with European Union. They want all these import duties to reduce significantly and preferably go away, which India does not agree to. And biggest complaint of European Union is the kind of asymmetry which the two nations have in their import duties. For example, the cars imported into India are levied around 60 and ranging up to 80% of the import duty if they are made in European Union. On the other hand, European Union imposes just a 6 to 10% import duty from cars imported from India or manufactured in India and imported into European Union. And so this is a big asymmetry. Similarly, on wines manufactured and packaged in European Union, India imposes around 60 to 70% of the import duty. So European Union wants equalization of these duties below the level of 10%. They say that we levy a duty of 10% and similarly you should. Whereas Indian government claims that the level of automobile manufacturing that they have and the quality they have, it cannot be equated with the low end or middle end cars which are being exported from India to the European Union. And apart from that, the recent emphasis of the government of India on Atmanirbhar Bharat has been clearly raised by European Union in last 2 to 3 meetings. European Union agencies are extremely concerned that under the garb of Atmanirbhar Bharat, the government of India is going to prioritize and be partial or act partially as far as the Indian companies are concerned. So the overall charge of European Union on India is that the Indian government acts extremely protectionist. It acts in a manner to protect the national or the domestic companies of India, which is not quite conducive to any kind of free trade agreement. So that is an issue number 1. Let's now look into the another important aspect, which is the major issue number 2 is services sector. And let us first understand what are the Indian demands from European Union side. And they mainly deal with the IT professionals because let's admit it, that is the best service exports which we have, and that has yielded the kind of results no other sector has yielded in India so far in last 50 years. And so first, India wants liberalization of visa regime in European Union. Then apart from liberalization of visa regime, Indian government wants our IT professionals to stay temporarily without any terms and conditions in European Union and to be able to travel among different countries. But according to European Union, these two matters are dealt within by the national governments. And so, as far as negotiation of a trade agreement with European Union goes, these things cannot be dealt within with a single agreement. You will have to talk to each and every individual country if you want to sort out the work visas, the work permits and other things. Then as we know that European Union is actually a union of a lot of countries. And since there are a lot of countries, there are a lot of standards and qualifications in each of the fields, which India wants to be standardized. Because if there are more than 20 partners, there are more than 20 qualifications and standards which a single person has to satisfy individually, and so it ultimately results into as many paperworks and as many qualifications. But if all of them are combined into one single standard across European Union, it is going to help India or any other country for that matter which is entering into an agreement with EU a much more than it is doing now. So this is about Indian demands from EU side. Now what EU demands from India is that it wants to liberalize India's accountancy and legal services. Now currently in India, you can practice as a CA or you can practice as a lawyer if you have a degree from Indian recognized universities or Indian universities. But an Australian person or a German national having a degree in accountancy from there cannot come to India and practice as a CA. That is the current condition which Indian government has. And that is basically to provide some kind of protection to Indian nationals. But European Union government wants their accountancy and legal services companies to enter into Indian market with their own professionals, and because of which they are demanding liberalization of such streams in our country. So this was the second major challenge. The third major challenge deals with the restrictive measures which India and EU have adopted in the trade to each other. So these are the measures which have been adopted by India, which restrict the access to market as far as European companies are concerned. For example, access to IT sector and telecom industry. Because under these two sectors, the Indian government requires that any firm which is dealing within must be registered in India. And so that is one of the biggest problems. Similarly, as far as telecom sector goes, there is a requirement of mandatory in-country, that is within India, testing and licensing of each and every equipment, which becomes a major hurdle for European Union telecom companies if they want to enter into Indian market. Similarly, if we talk about European Union restrictions on Indian companies, we have one of the world's highest phytosanitary measures. So sanitary or phytosanitary measures are biosecurity measures which are applied to protect humans and animals and plant life. And European Union has one of the world's highest standards as far as sanitary measures are concerned, because of which a lot of Indian exports, for example, mango, have been banned or were temporarily banned because they were found to contain some of the traces of pesticides or fertilizers or some other toxins which were not allowed in European Union, because of which Indian agriculture has suffered a lot. And so India wants these phytosanitary measures to be lowered down so that Indian agricultural exports do not face a lot of problem. So this was the matter number 3. Then moving on to the fourth biggest issue, which is about data security. Now EU categorizes India as data insecure country. And so this is one of the major hurdles as far as India-EU BTIA is concerned. Despite India amending IT Act 2000, the European Union nations are not convinced about the level of protection which is provided to the data in our country. And since India comes under such categorization, it is prohibitive for any European Union company to do any kind of trade or service exchange with India, which would require a flow of data of European Union nationals to India. And so what it basically does is that it prevents the flow of data from EU to India. So in essence, it means that no European Union based or headquartered company or registered company would ever open its backend or any kind of R&D in India, because it is prohibited in European Union laws. And finally, rules related to FDI. We know that a lot of these rules have changed, and Indian government has liberalized most of these sectors related to insurance, wholesale trade and single brand retail. But still, they are not at the level which is being demanded by European Union countries. And then finally, India's model BIT or bilateral investment treaty. So India has recently proposed a bilateral investment treaty model agreement, and which has also created a lot of problems, and all of these have already been discussed in the DNS, as you can see on the screen. So if you want to understand what are the issues with current legislation which has been proposed for model BIT, you should go back and watch this DNS, because otherwise it is going to extend the length of this DNS and this particular discussion way too much longer. So I can hope that through this discussion, you can now easily understand what are FTAs or free trade agreements, what are the general sequences, what are the different nomenclatures, and what are the important distinctions between the two, why two countries enter into a free trade agreement, and what are the specific reasons for India and EU to enter into such an agreement, and what are the major hurdles or roadblocks still in the way of India-EU BTIA. Let us now move on to the next discussion. This next news which we have taken appears on page number 8. Hope soars as Second World War airport in Assam takes commercial wings. So an airport built for warplanes in 1939 took commercial wings yesterday, heralding the best of times for Western Assam's Dhubri district during the worst of the times. If you know the location of the national waterway, you must be knowing the locations of both Sadia as well as Dhubri. And so connecting this important town, not just with the national waterway, but on India's aviation route was very, very important for India. Now, if you look at GS Paper 3 syllabus under infrastructure, energy, ports, roads, airports, and railways are required for you to be clearly understood. Now, what does this understanding means? If we are preparing roads or airports or railways, you first should know the advantages or the strength of that particular sector in India. For example, in case of airports or aviation sector, you should understand what are the advantages which India's domestic market offers, why it's taking such a boom in past 5 to 10 years. And once you have done that, as an administrator, you should be clearly aware about the challenges which aviation sector is facing, and that is what exactly we are going. And so let us now start the discussion with the factors which have been responsible in case of India behind the aviation boom. So India's domestic aviation sector increased to around 117 million passengers in 2017 with 100 flights taking off every hour, which is quite in contrast to around 59 million passengers and 67 takeoff per minute in 2011. So we can see that within a period of around 6 years, just half decade, not only the traffic in terms of the number of planes taking off, but also in terms of passenger, it has doubled in the country. And so there has to be some very, very important reasons behind it. Starting with one of the most important reasons behind the rapid growth, allowing foreign investment into India's aviation sector. In order to attract foreign investment, the government announced a policy which was designed to allow FDI of 49% and for NRI fully 100% was allowed to be invested in domestic airline sector. However, deregulation of domestic market has been accompanied by continued regulation of the foreign airlines ownership being prohibited. This certainly prevented foreign-owned airlines competing in domestic market. And so that is why when foreign companies come into India's domestic market, they have to do an alliance with either Tata or some of the other domestic companies. It is mandatory for them. Then as far as India's aviation sector is concerned, it can be categorized into low entry barrier market. The possibilities that new firms may enter the sector also affects the competition. And in the Indian aviation sector, the barriers to entry are generally low, leading to numerous airlines starting up every year. However, there are significant barriers to growth, and the probability that exists in form of regulatory limitations, non-availability of resources, very expensive aviation fuel, all these are barriers to growth, but as far as entry is concerned, it has very low barriers to entry. When you have multiple players, ultimately it's a consumer which is going to be benefited. Then comes the most important reason, because more and more people, especially the new generation people, are preferring to travel through air route. That is the rising income levels and demographic profile of India. The demand for air travel we know is highly income elastic. This means that the growth in Indian economy, the demand for air travel is also expected to grow. And globalization should continue to boost the traffic in the long term. As the average income of Indians rise and more people start getting employed in the formal sector, we can see a clear trend over the preference given to the aviation route as compared to the railways and roadways. Then obviously in India we have large number of places which are still untapped in terms of their tourism potential. And that is mainly with respect to the lack of regional connectivity so far. But as soon as the government of India has come up with regional connectivity scheme and is providing for more and more number of airstrips in remote areas, the demand for aviation sector is only going to increase in future. And finally, there is ever increasing attraction of foreign shores, meaning Indian domestic companies extending their services into foreign countries. Due to increasing fleet and to reduce the competition and make more profit, some of the domestic operated airlines expand their operations abroad. Because still, most of the travel which happens between foreign countries to and fro from India is dominated by foreign aviation companies. And this is an untapped market as far as our India's domestic aviation sector is concerned. And so these are the factors which have led to excessive boom in India's aviation sector. But that obviously doesn't mean that this sector is without any challenges. You can say that such a growth has happened despite these very, very important and perpetuating challenges to India's aviation sector. And as we have clearly seen in the syllabus, it is important for you to have a clear-cut idea about some of the most important infrastructural sectors, and aviation is one of them. And one of the most important challenge which is being faced by the aviation sector is the shortage of trained employees. There is a shortage of trained and skilled manpower in the aviation sector, because of which there is cutthroat competition for employees, which is driving the wages to unsustainable levels and hence impacting deeply these companies. Then we have a lot of challenges dealing with infrastructure, and they mainly have to do with the airports. First, we need to understand that cost of new airports is massive. It's just not about the airport. You have to connect that airport with local transport, with highways. Then you have to protect that new airport, and so you have to provide top level security. And so the funding mechanism of airport is such that the costs of incorrect capacity planning are borne by passengers via airport development fees, which basically means that the high cost cannot be borne by either the state or the private companies, and so they are ultimately passed on to the consumers, which then leads to the higher fees of travel. Then in our country, the maintenance and repair sector is very, very nascent. So basically, just like your car and your bike needs to be repaired every few months or every few thousand kilometers, these airplanes also need regular maintenance, which are called maintenance and repair, or short formed as MRO, which is one of the major expenses on the aviation companies so far. And the GST which has been levied by the central government on this is 18%. And this amount of taxation is highest globally, and on top of that you have poor facility, because of which even the domestic companies fly their aircrafts abroad for maintenance. Now you can understand that this could be such a big industry employing thousands of people into it, but just because of the irrational taxation, most of the companies are getting their aircraft serviced abroad. Then you have saturation of existing airports. Now this might seem contradictory. You can say that new airports are coming, that is true. But what about the number of runways on existing airports? We can see that once an airport is created, the amount of traffic, the number of aircraft which it starts to receive keeps on increasing year on year. But that is not reflected in the amount of runways or the number of runways which that particular airport has. So for most of the mega cities, once the airports were created, with the exception of Delhi, none of the major airports across the country have added on to the existing number of runways. So what it basically does is that it limits the number of aircraft which can be handled by a particular airport. Then you have a lot of constrained lending or financing in the aviation sector. You need to understand that Indian Airlines are sitting on tremendous fleet orders, and these orders and expansion plans of airlines require financing. And in the current environment, banks are extremely reluctant to lend aviation sector. And the reasons are many, including fluctuating EBITDA, weak balance sheets, and all this is a result of extremely heavy competition, which results in very low margin of profit. Though a large number of new airports have come in, but still India needs to tackle a lot of regional connectivity. To provide regional connectivity is still one of the greatest challenges confronting aviation sector. Then again, all these problems are interrelated. Since the cost of new airports is extremely high, you are not able to open up new airports in remote areas, and so that is what is causing regional connectivity issues. Then, as we have already discussed, that due to low barriers of entry, there are a lot of companies which have entered into this arena, which has created high level of competition, then which has led to reduction in the yields. And so all the aircraft agencies, all the companies servicing in this sector work on very thin margin of profit. And if either of the factors tweaked with, they immediately run into losses, just like Jet Airways, Kingfisher Airlines, Sahara Airlines, and many other such airlines which were once flourishing, but a small fluctuation aviation turbine fuel completely turned their profits into losses. Because aviation turbine fuel, or ATF, is lifeblood of aviation. It constitutes 40% of India's airlines cost base and hence ends up as one of the largest expenses item. If you compare it globally, it is around 20%, and it is double that in India. And one of the important reasons behind such high prices of ATF is that, remember that it is just like petrol and diesel, and it is not covered under the purview of GST, and so the cascading impacts of indirect taxes apply on it, and that is one of the reasons why ATF is so expensive in our country. So from the perspective of mains examination, these challenges with respect to aviation sector are very, very important. Let us now move on to the next news. So the next news which we have taken appears on page number 8. And this news talks about Indian entities including hospitals and charitable trusts hoping to receive relief material from overseas individual donors or donor agencies could be in trouble unless they are registered under FCRA with stated objective involving provision of medical care. So the government has permitted imports without GST levies for some of the relief material donated from abroad for fee distribution in country, delegating states to certify the entities that will receive such imports. So what is the trouble? You need to understand that there is no exemption under FCRA currently. So recent permission by the government has created more confusion, and lack of FCRA nod for foreign donation is keeping the process delayed. FCRA does not provide any kind of blanket exemption on imports or donations. And so the time has come for us to take a deeper look into Foreign Contribution Regulation Act 2010. So this was an act which was created because we wanted to regulate the acceptance and utilization of foreign contribution or foreign hospitality by certain individuals or associations or companies, and to prohibit acceptance and utilization of foreign contribution or hospitality for any activities which could be detrimental to national interest and for matters connected with or thereto. So basically what it means in essence is that we don't want our domestic politics to be compromised because of the foreign funding. We don't want foreign companies to either contribute in our domestic process or in any way impact the governing or the day-to-day governance of our country, and so because of which we created FCRA, which replaced the earlier FCRA of 1976. And so it applies to whole of India, citizens of India outside India, and associate branches or subsidiaries outside of India, or companies or body corporate registered or incorporated in India. So it is just not applicable to the government bodies but also applicable to private companies. And what does foreign contribution means? So of course it has to originate in foreign land, and so it is delivery or transfer made by any foreign source of what? Of any article, any currency or any security which has been variously defined and well described in the Act. You should note that normal banking transfer of money by Indian resident abroad to India is not taken into account under FCRA because after all he is an Indian resident who is transfer money to his home. So who can receive foreign contribution? So any person can receive foreign contribution, but it must have a definite cultural, economic, educational, religious or social program. And this is the clause through which a lot of religious organizations keep on receiving funding from outside. Then it must obtain FCRA registration or prior permission from central government. So if you are dealing in these sectors and if you get a prior permission from central government, you become eligible to receive foreign funds. And you must not be prohibited under section 3 of FCRA. Now what does section 3 of FCRA contains? It contains a big list. Candidate for election cannot receive funds from foreign countries. Correspondents, columnists, cartoonists, editors and these people working in media cannot receive foreign funds because ultimately they are opinion makers, and we don't want our opinion makers to be impacted from outside influence. Judges, of course there is no need to explain. Member of legislature, political party or office bearers thereof. Now here is a home assignment for you. You have seen a lot of news where the foreign companies were allowed to contribute into the funding of political parties. Now when it is clearly prohibited under the section 3 of the FCRA, how has it been allowed in last 2 to 3 years? That is what you have to find out and let us know in the comment section. So these are the people or the groups which cannot receive foreign funding. And so what are the issues with FCRA? FCRA prohibits foreign funding on public interest or economic interest, but does not define or fails to define what exactly it means. And so there is a wide discretion which has been given to the central government with respect to restricting or constricting the funding for a particular organization. Then recent amendment would restrict these small NGOs that are unable to get registered yet require funds. It would also cause delayed functioning to those subsidiary NGOs which are dependent on other large NGOs for fund. Because earlier what was automatic has now been made conditional. And so if you are an NGO functioning in India and if you're receiving funds from outside, you need to renew your license every year from Home Ministry if you want to receive the funds. FCRA restrictions have serious consequences on both right to free speech, freedom of association under Article 19(1)(a) and 1(c) of the Constitution of India. Because now the funding has been made conditional upon the issue with a particular NGO is taking up. So for example, if an NGO is dealing with the cause of tribals who are protesting against a development of a coal mine in a particular area in our country, the government can take it as opposition to development and growth, and it can restrict the funding of that NGO which is taking up the cause of these tribals. Then, by allowing some of political groups to receive foreign donations and disallowing some others, can induce biases in favor of the government. We know that many NGOs have been deregistered by security agencies on public interest with no clear explanation. So these are the issues with FCRA which still persist. And so, FCRA should be amended to bring parity based on constitutional values. Emergency clause could be added in the Act to deal with medical problems. Single window provision for registration of NGOs for their grievance redressal must be provided. An upper limit for non-registered NGOs can be increased for the time being. Probing into digging construction activities in Kaziranga appears on page number 6. So the authorities in Assam's Golaghat and Nagaon districts have begun probing cases of clearances of forest land, digging and construction activities on at least 3 animal corridors within the eco-sensitive zone of Kaziranga National Park as well as Tiger Reserve. Now in the past we have seen how important these tiger reserves and national parks are, especially with respect to some of the important animals which are found there and their location with respect to the state and if there is some important river or not. So Kaziranga National Park is a park located in 3 districts of Assam, Golaghat, Karbi Anglong and Nagaon. So you can understand that it is very vast stretch of land extending into 3 districts in Assam. So first and foremost, it is important to keep in mind Kaziranga National Park because of single-horned rhinoceros or one-horned rhinoceros. It hosts 2/3 of world's total animals which are one-horned rhinoceros. So you can understand that how critically important Kaziranga is for the preservation and protection of these species. It is also home to one of the highest density of tigers, not the highest. Of course, the highest density of tigers as of now is in Jim Corbett National Park, but that is followed very closely by Kaziranga National Park. So, one-horned rhinoceros and then tiger conservation. For these two, it is very important. But apart from them, elephants, wild water buffalo and swamp deer are also found copiously in this particular national park. It is recognized as an important bird area by BirdLife International for conservation of avifaunal species. It is located, of course, on the edge of Eastern Himalaya biodiversity hotspot, and it combines high species diversity as well as visibility. As you can see on the map, it lies on the bank of Brahmaputra river and it consists of vast expanse of tall elephant grass, marshland and dense tropical moist broadleaf forest. And so that is one of the important piece of information you should have as far as any national park or tiger reserve which is in news is concerned.